Welcome to a podcast about self-help using memes. Hey there, everybody. It's Blake Morgan. This episode will be about social skills. Again, this is a concept that is related to the other topics that we're going to talk about. But one thing you'll notice with the content of his podcast is it's going to cover a variety of topics. Meme is in the name, but if you haven't listened to the first episode of the podcast, I'd encourage you to go back because meme has a very specific social science definition. And so in that sense, any large idea like potatoes or hats or video games are all a meme because they are an idea that you can describe in abstract terms and compare to other ideas. This portion of the podcast is a topic that's related to that, but not necessarily specifically about memes. I will have plenty of other podcasts where I talk specifically more about what I mean by memes and other types of memes and how memes relate to each other. This specific podcast is around social skills, which is not necessarily a topic I thought I was going to be talking about when I was arranging what I thought this podcast would be about. But as I've looked through these communities on the internet, I've found there to be a need or at least a desire for this sort of content. If you go to Reddit, which is one of the most popular, websites on the internet, and you look up the content for self-help or self-improvement, and you look at the new sorts of questions that people are submitting in those sorts of formats, there's stuff like, how do I make small talk? There's stuff like, I get nervous every time I have to buy something or negotiate. How do I do that? And so this is meant to be an introductory guide, a 101. So I want to talk for a little bit just about how to make small talk. If you were to break that down into a process that someone were going to try to replicate, how would you teach someone to make small talk if they just don't know how? And so that's going to be the first half of the episode. The second half of the episode is going to be about negotiating. And I don't mean broad strokes, $1 million deal, 80s, high pressure, slick back suspenders, like pressure negotiating kind of thing. That's not what I mean. It can be that, but that's not the meme I'm going for. Mine's easier. Mine's like buying stuff on Facebook Marketplace. And so I'd like to give some practical tips for just how to negotiate or get better at negotiating or be less anxious when you do negotiate. And so I appreciate you tuning in, and then we'll get into those topics now. So making small talk. As a concept, let's kind of discuss that because this is one of those, it's very important to understand your own perspective kind of things. And so let me talk about what small talk means to me. What is that? Why would we need it? Why do we care about it? Stuff like that. Because it's kind of innocuous if it's something you do well. Small talk is just space, just conversation that helps fill space and time. And so if you're standing by somebody in an elevator, or there's a group of you in a line at an amusement park ride, or you're all just kind of waiting on your food at a restaurant, right? There are lots of societal reasons where small talk could need to happen. This can happen in your family if you're at events with people that you don't see very often. So at like Thanksgiving or Christmas, those are relatives you maybe see once a year, depending on your family circumstance. And so you're not going to have the greatest shared vocabulary. And that's kind of the other thing to know about when or why you'd want to use small talk. All conversation is just figuring out what you have related to the other person. At the beginning of small talk, the only thing you have related is the fact that you're there and standing next to each other. And so, or you're on the internet or whatever version of small talk you're doing. But the point is you don't know anything about that other person yet. And so instead of being able to walk up to them and go, hey, Jerry, how is your wife? Right? You don't know their name and you don't know that they have a wife. You just know they're a person standing behind you at Walmart. And so why does that matter? Well, there's some like social circumstances where you just want to be able to make small talk. It passes the time. It makes it easier. Some people hate small talk. And so that's not to say that you have to, but there are circumstances where you'd want that. There are also circumstances where, and I don't mean this to be mean, but you can look out of place if you don't know how. And so from a functioning in society perspective or from a getting through the day perspective, it can just be good to understand on a basic level how to make small talk from nothing. And so that's the first, I guess, part of how to make small talk is find literally one common ground thing around you just to break the ice. And then don't let go of that. Because again, the hardest part of starting a conversation with someone is finding something to have a conversation about. The specific example that inspired this section of the podcast was a Reddit post from a user, and I won't put their name here. You can go to Reddit and find it if you want. But there was a user who had posted a question in self-help, just asking for self-improvement or self-help or do better every day. It was one of the self-improvement subreddits. And their question was, how do I make small talk? I work at a bakery. I'm bad at small talk, and I'm worried I'm going to get fired. So if somebody could teach me how to make small talk, that would be super. So I'm not like awkward around my coworkers. And on its face, honestly, the first reaction I have to that is to just feel bad for that person. No one should get fired because they can't make small talk. I'd like to think that they're like exaggerating. I'd also like to think that maybe that's just their way of worrying about doing well at work. But if their boss ever said anything like Greg, if you don't get better at talking to your coworkers, we're going to have to let you go. I know it's in the middle of a pandemic and there's a million more jobs than people that want them. And you're really good at being a baker, but like, if you can't talk about fishing trips, we're going to have to let you go, right? And any boss that actually says something like that probably shouldn't be your boss. But my point is, the hardest part of making small talk is that first initial leap, because you have to talk out loud to someone that doesn't know you, right? And so step one, I guess step zero is they kind of have to be looking at you or not have headphones in. Like, they have to be ready or understand that you're talking to them. Because if you just talk at them, you're not going to get a result. It's largely when I do this in public. And so if people aren't paying attention and I'm just talking out loud, they don't understand that I'm talking to them. And so it may be good to wait for a moment of eye contact to say something, or gesture and point at whatever you're talking about so they can see that you're attempting to start a conversation about a thing in your shared space. So that's how I would do that as a concept. So what does that actually sound like in real life? And let's keep with our example again, because it's a real Reddit post. If you follow the information in this podcast, there's a Twitter link and a Reddit link. And I like to start conversations about sorts of stuff like this. But there's a real Reddit post out there about a person who is a baker, and they're worried about this. So I'm going to hold on to that example. If you were a baker, or hypothetically, if I were a baker working in a bakery, and I was worried that I was going to get fired for not making small talk with my coworkers, here are like 3 things just every day that I think you could use to start a conversation. The first is the weather. You're going to have some sort of weather every day. That's an oldie but a goodie. You can talk about how hot it is, or how cold it is, or how unexpected that storm was, or how it blew over your chair, or how your dog's afraid of lightning, right? There's a billion things you could talk about related to the weather. And that's all you're looking to do, is start a conversation. Another really easy go-to for me, so I guess the second thing that I would use to start a conversation with somebody, is just whatever they're wearing or they personally have with them. And I would be careful about this one, right? If somebody has like a defining physical feature, you don't want to go, hey man, nice huge nose, right? That's really not what you want to say. But if somebody's wearing like a t-shirt from a show or a band that you like, if I worked in a bakery, and I have done this in public service, if somebody from the public is wearing something I like, I just say that. If I'm checking you out at a register and I like your shirt, I'm going to say, hey man, nice shirt. I appreciate that. I like that show because, right? And so you can start conversations just with whatever people have. That works with customers. If you work at a bakery, right? Anybody that comes in, compliment them on their earrings, or if they've clearly put a bunch of effort into getting their hair done that day. Whether you think it's bad or not, you can compliment effort. Hey, you look like you put a lot of work into your hair this morning. That looks nice, right? You might not be your hairstyle, but you can acknowledge the fact that they put effort into it, right? So you can pick something that they're wearing or they have with them, or a defining feature. And then the third kind of go to, especially at this time of year, and I don't know when you're listening to it, but you can kind of amend this to be any holiday. Talk about what you just got done doing or you are about to do. And I kind of mean that in 2 separate ways. The first is like weeks and weekends are usually good units of time to talk about at work. So talk about what you did last weekend or talk about what you are going to do this weekend. If you have a non-traditional job, just any days off, like, hey, Bill, what'd you do with your day off, right? That's a very decent way to start a conversation with anybody else. If you don't want to talk specifically about weeks or weekends, that makes sense. And kind of what I was alluding to at the beginning of this is you can also talk about holidays. So this time of year, you can just say things like, hey, got any big plans for Thanksgiving? Or when you come back from Christmas, say something like, wow, I had a really relaxing time. How'd that go for you, right? Like that's sort of, if you happen to have time off. My point is, after Christmas, ask him about Christmas. Around the 4th of July, ask him about the plan for 4th of July. If you have a different holiday where you live, ask him about that. But the point is, you can talk about stuff without really having substance. Just pick things around you. If your goal is to only drive conversation, you can start doing that by talking about stuff like the weather, what people are wearing, what you're about to do. There's a million other ways to do this. And that's a second, and I'm not quite done talking about small talk yet, but I do want to pause for a second and acknowledge I consider myself really good at small talk. I'm kind of my family's resident small talk guy. Like if somebody has to get sacrificed to the small talk gods in a public setting, I'm going to get pushed toward the crowd of people before they do. And that's fine. I'm willing to talk to most people. Clearly, I'm making a podcast that you're listening to. But just because I'm good at it doesn't mean I know everything. And so if you have a hot take on something you use as a conversation starter for small talk, or you have tried something like I tried to talk about the weather and then they cried and ran away. What happened, right? So if you have either a hot take on something that you tried that I'm suggesting that didn't work, or conversely, and this would be awesome, if you're good at small talk and want to give tips that I left out of this, please engage the community at large, right? Some podcasts have a Facebook group that you can kind of go talk about the stuff in it. I just set mine up as a Reddit community instead. So if this is a podcast about self-help using memes, there's a subreddit just called self-help using memes. And so if you want to engage in a discussion or have tips or tricks or feedback, that's the place to put it. So the very last thing I'd like to do in the small talk section is just kind of talk about where you go from there, right? And so what you don't want to be is like a dog who's like chasing a mail truck or like a bird or something, and then you actually catch it and have no idea what to do. So if you're bad at small talk and somehow manage to start small talk, you're gonna need step 2, and that's kind of this. After you have started small talk, so again, hey, Bill, cool shirt. I like Avenged Sevenfold too, or Taylor Swift, or whatever, right? You've started a conversation. Now what do you do? As a rule of thumb, just be natural. At that point, if you're already talking with somebody, just go wherever it goes. If Bill says, yeah, I like Avenged Sevenfold, I saw him last year, then you say, oh, cool. When did you see them last year? How was the show? Did you like it? Right? Did you buy that shirt there? Like you pick, right? Pick any detail of what they just talked about and ask more questions about it. And that's how you keep conversations going. If you are uncomfortable supplying your half of the conversation, don't. Other people love talking uninterrupted. Again, I'm recording a podcast at you. That's just what I'm doing, right? People will let them talk if you just ask them questions. Even shy people, even people who have never talked to you before. People answer questions and like talking about themselves. Now, this isn't always going to work, right? If you try to talk to Bill on Monday morning and Bill's grumpy or had a bad weekend, maybe that day is not the day for small talk. And again, that's when I go back to the beginning of the intro and say, it's kind of ridiculous to me that you get fired for not being good at making small talk. But if you want skills for small talk, that's what this is. Follow this guide so far, and you'll be able to make small talk with your coworkers, with your boss, with people in line, people over the phone. And that's kind of another thing. Small talk matters in mediums that aren't in real life. If you're on hold with a customer service representative or they're pulling your stuff up, right? You make small talk on the phone too. It's just different than in real life. So small talk can be a very important part of our lives, but if you're good at it, you don't really think about it. And so this serves as a guide for people who would either like to understand it better on a mechanical level or just get better at it themselves. But that's Small Talk 101. If there's feedback, we'll revisit this or expand it. But I just wanted to make a quick how to make small talk guide. So with small talk sorted, I want to spend the rest of the time we've got together talking about negotiating, because that's another one of those topics that kind of makes the people that hate it really anxious. Like if somebody's bad at negotiating and you say, okay, well, but you got to kind of go walk in there and tell them what you want, and that like you're going to be mad if they don't give it to you, and like you're going to argue about price it. And so there's a lot of anxiety invoking parts of negotiating for people who don't feel comfortable negotiating. I would also pause and say that both negotiating and small talk are both skills. And so the first time you do it, it's going to feel awkward or weird, but the 1,000th time you've done it, it just is how it works, right? And that's just how our brains function. You're used to the kinds of communication you do every day. That's comfortable to you. You do it every day. It's when you step outside of that and try to do it in a new way, that's where that discomfort comes from. And that's something you kind of just got to work through. You should understand that it's uncomfortable because it is change, but you are making that change because it's a good thing for you. And so negotiating can be one of those parts of your life where if you're looking to upgrade your social skills, this one literally just saves you money. And in the introduction, I kind of gave a high level, negotiation is this meme, right? It's like tense stuff where there could be like nuclear war and the people on the other sides of a table are like angry at each other and it's $1 million deal, right? And that's not where I'm going with it. For this, I'm talking about stuff like if you need to get a new apartment and they tell you the rent is $550 and you can only afford $500, how you might have that conversation. Or you would like to buy a new game or picture or something off of like Facebook Marketplace or whatever, right now, right? And you want to spend $20 and they have it listed for $30. How would you do that, right? And that's kind of the conversation I'm looking to have. And so just practical, applicable tips for how to get more out of negotiating, and to a lesser degree, how to be more comfortable with that process. Because again, when you view negotiation as a meme, you do it a lot. You just do it in little parts and in little places that you maybe don't think about. And so I kind of want to get into those. So the very first thing that I want to put in perspective with negotiating is the potential for failure, because that's what a lot of people have an issue with, right? What if I try to do this and it doesn't work? And so I have what I think is a good way of contextualizing this. And like most other ways that I try to live my life, it's a quote or an idiom or a maxim that I keep in my head. But this one is not from some famous person. I mean, if he is famous, I don't know it. But it was a random gentleman in a training class for a job that I used to have forever ago. And part of that job was selling people things on the phones. I'm not going to get specific about what that is on purpose. But the point of it is you had to talk to people on the phone and try to sell them something that they very likely did not want. And that was fine. They're going to tell you they don't want it. But that same anxiety exists. You are worried you are going to talk about money or try to sell something or bother somebody, and they're just going to tell you no. It's a concern. It's an anxiety. It's selling. It's negotiating, right? And the advice that guy gave me was, he gave the whole class this advice because there was a person who was having panic attacks trying to sell things over the phone. But anyway, he gave the whole training class at that job the exact same advice. He said, just remember, they can't take your birthday away. And what he meant by that was, no matter how hard you crash and burn, you're still going to have a birthday tomorrow, right? And what he meant by that was, it's okay to fail. Say it, they say no, and then you move on. You still have a birthday. You're still as good as you were a minute before the call. You're not a different person. They're not a different person. Life goes on, right? They can't take your birthday away. Is what I think of every time I'm about to try something that might not work. Just try. If it doesn't work, okay, it didn't work and you're no worse off, but at least you kind of tried. So for example, if I'm buying something on Facebook Marketplace and it costs $100 and I say, hey, I only got $50. Would you take 50 for it? And they say no. Okay, then I don't have whatever I tried to buy and I still have my $50, right? I'm not worse off. So at the very least, just understand they can't take your birthday away, right? And that's sort of the second, I guess, tip there or thing to know about negotiating is the very worst thing that can happen is that deal falls apart and you're no worse off. Now, if that's something you need, like food or a place to live or medical care, right? There's lots of negotiations that you do not want to let fall apart because it would hurt you or be bad or cost you money, right? But the implication to low stakes negotiations, like the ones that I've just outlined, again, Facebook Marketplace, I buy a lot of stuff on Facebook Marketplace because it's the example that I'm using. But if you're buying things on Facebook Marketplace, that's not the stakes, right? Like it's not whether you eat or have a house or have insulin or something. It's so you can get a video game. Like it'll be okay. So yeah, it's just contextualize it like that, right? You might not get what you want, but that's okay. It wasn't something you needed. It was just something you wanted. That's the sort of the third negotiating bullet point or tip or trick. The biggest power move in any negotiation is to just stop negotiating. And I'm not the first person to write about this. There are books. I am not a negotiations expert. I'm a communications expert. And so I've thought about negotiations from a communications perspective. But if you wanted a negotiation podcast, this isn't it. This is like a part of one episode about social science aspects of negotiations. But the biggest thing you can do when somebody says, hey, I think you should pay me $100 for this, and you say, hey, I think I should walk away. How do you like $0, right? That's kind of the biggest power move you can possibly do. And that's why when you negotiate, it's important to understand that is your ultimate leverage, right? That's the button that's under the plastic case that when you push it, right? Like there's no going back. That's done. And there is going back, right? It's not over. You could be like, hey, we talked last week and I kind of changed my mind. Is that still available? Right? You can literally go back. But in that negotiation, to just say, I find your deal unacceptable and therefore I am walking away, is the most powerful tool you have, because then that forces them to change the deal to suit your needs if they would like for there to be a deal. The important part to understand about this advice is, you lose all leverage if you try this and it doesn't work. So if you are really not willing to do without whatever it is you're negotiating for, don't say this, because if they take you up on it, you just won't have that thing anymore. The next thing that I want to cover is something I see people do wrong. And again, I'm going to say wrong in terms of my personal experience. I'm not, again, there are books about negotiations. This is not one of them. But I've read, again, Reddit posts from, he purported to be a former police hostage negotiator. I don't know how true that is. It's the internet. You can say whatever you want. But he then was giving those tips that he, again, claimed to have used to just save people's lives to buy cars. It was specifically how to buy used cars from the perspective of a former hostage negotiator. And I have to track this down on the internet. But more or less the advice he gave, and I've been trying to use this since then, was never demean the product that you're trying to buy. And by that, I mean, I don't know if you've ever had the experience of trying to trade a car into a dealership, like a traditional car dealership. Because when you do that, what they'll do is they'll drive the car and then they'll point out everything that's wrong with it and tell you why that should be worth less money, right? So if you're going to sell a car to them for $1,000, they'll point out the ding on the front and that's $25, and then like the rip in the seat, that's another $100. So really the best they can give you is $875, like that sort of conversation, right? Don't do that when you're trying to buy something. Instead, make the product clearly good, but just more money than you can spend, right? And so that phrasing comes out as something to the effect of, hey, I see that you have that jet ski on Facebook Marketplace for like, I don't know how much jet skis are, so I'm very sorry. Mock me if this is wrong. $1,000. It's worth $1,000. That's a good jet ski. I understand why you have it listed for $1,000. Problem is, I only have $800. So I would love to buy that from you, but I can only do it for $800. And so then they can choose whether to accept or decline your offer, but there's nothing to haggle with there. You haven't told them something that's wrong, and they can be like, well, it's not that dented. Let's only knock off $10, right? There's no space for that conversation. You're acknowledging that their product is superior and good and worth what they're asking for it. You're simply refusing to pay it, right? And that's like a very powerful negotiating tool that will, or at least in my personal experience does, get me further than trying to point out everything that's wrong. You both know there's stuff that's wrong, but you put yourself into a more advantageous position if you can maintain sort of that approach. It's a good product. I just don't have the money you want for it. The next thing I want to talk about in terms of negotiating is as asking for more than you need or want. And so if, for example, you were going to purchase something on Facebook Marketplace that costs $200, but you really only wanted to spend $100 for it, or maybe you only have $100 to spend for it, or maybe you only think it's worth $100. The point is the price is $200 and the amount of money you'd like to give them is $100, right? If you want to pay $100, you cannot message them and say, hey, I see that you have it listed for $200. I would very much like to only pay $100. Will that work? Because what they are going to do, if they are me, is just try to get you to pay a little bit more, right? If you're willing to pay $100, I bet you're willing to pay $125. And so my reply to you is going to be, hey, I really can't do $100, but would $125 work, right? And so my point of this thought exercise is, if you really want to pay $100, you have to actually ask for a lower price than that. Don't go so insultingly low that it's a joke. Don't go so insultingly low, like, I'll give you $1. Like, it's not The Price is Right. They're clearly not going to do that. But if you can find a real but low number, it'll work. One of the greatest examples of this that you can go watch yourself is every season of American Pickers or Pawn Stars ever, right? This is just the format of every negotiation they do, which should tell you something about negotiating to sustain a business. But by the time that you're seeing it on like the History Channel or whatever, I imagine that's totally scripted. They're not really negotiating with people. But if you were gonna actually run that sort of business, like a junk picking business or like a pawn business, you absolutely have to do this all day, every day. So if you would like experts in this, I would go watch those shows or look up any resources that those people have made and understand that it's fiction, but don't try to copy it exactly, but look at how they're doing what they're doing. The second way this advice applies is in getting a new job, right? So the other half of the negotiation here is, if you're going to apply for a new job and to pay your rent and your utilities and get food and pay for your car, right? You know the amount of money you need, or at least you should. If you don't, I would advise that you add up what it costs you to exist in a month, and that should tell you whether you make enough money for your current lifestyle. But anyway, that conversation aside, this is the conversation. These are tools that you should use to have a conversation with a potential employer around salary. And you don't need to tell them any of those details. What you need is a number. If I apply for a job that pays me $40,000 a year, but I know that my bills are $50,000 a year, I can't work at that job for $40,000. And so that's a conversation you can have with your boss. Hey, or potential new future boss, right? Or hirer, recruiter, depending on the organization you're in. My point is that conversation goes like, it's the same as the product. Hey, it's a good product, but I can't pay that much. Hey, this is a great company. I would be very excited to work for it. The problem is $40,000 just doesn't meet my needs. If there's any way that you could come up on that, I might consider it, but I just can't do it the way it is. So you can use that same advice in terms of getting hired as well. The very last thing I want to cover about negotiating is that maybe it always doesn't work out in terms of money, but there could still be value there. And I'm going to stick with the job example because that's easier, but you can kind of see where I'm going in Facebook Marketplace. If you were going to get a job that had $40,000 a year of pay, but that was just too low, and they can't pay you more, right? The organization doesn't have that, or they're telling you they don't have that, or it's a new company, right? They can't or won't pay you more. What else can they give you? Can you get more vacation time off? Can you get a title bump? Can you be put fast-tracked for a promotion for next year, right? What other intangible things can they give you? Can they give you extra sick time? Can they let you work from home in a way that your peers can't, right? Just because they can't pay you more doesn't mean they can't give you more things. And the second half of that is true if you are buying things. So for example, if you were going to purchase something on Facebook Marketplace and they can't make it any better of a deal than they have, right? Like you want a deal, they want a deal, you're just far apart on the price, right? What else can you do? Delivery is probably worth some sort of money, right? If they were willing to bring it to you, would that be worth knocking $10 off? You know, something to that effect, right? There's parts of every negotiation that aren't necessarily just about the money. And so whatever negotiation you're in, look for stuff like that. If you're looking for an apartment, maybe it's $550, but you can get them to throw in free internet or something. Like, I don't know, depending on where you live. My point is, negotiations are about the money. That's why you're there. But they can also be about other things to sort of offset if the money doesn't work the way you want it to. So that'll do it for our first episode on negotiations and small talk. Both of those are pretty, honestly, vital life skills, right? And so if that's something that you could use more help on, I would encourage you to try and use the parts of this podcast that I've provided. Hopefully the ability to take examples for how those conversations might sound in everyday life will let you take those examples and apply them to your own life. I look forward to continuing the conversation around these subjects with any of you that would like to have a conversation. So please head over to the Reddit community and put in anything that I forgot, or any tips that you have, or times where negotiations worked really bad or really well and how you did that, right? There's a million things we could talk about, and I'm excited to do it. So I'll release more podcasts that we can talk and work together on. But if, like I said, you have stuff to tell me, please do it. So I very much appreciate anybody that took the time to listen to this, and I'll talk to you next time. This has been a podcast about self-help using memes. Thanks for listening.